Here I've given you a list of all the arithmetic operators in Python. The first three operators should be pretty straightforward, but starting from the fourth, it gets a bit confusing. So the fourth operator does division and converts the result into a float, whereas the fifth integer division operator converts it into an integer. So the result of the fifth integer division operator might not be the actual result of the division. After that, there's the exponential operator, which is the double asterisks. That should be pretty straightforward too. And the last one yields the remainder of the division. Let's get to the coding. So first we're going to make a simple program that basically prints the type of the variable. Okay, there's a very useful function in Python called type, which you can just wrap around the variable and it'll return it as something like an int or a float or any type that this variable is. So you can see here in the results that it returns class int, which indicates that the variable n is an integer. And then if we change that to a decimal number, you see that the type of the variable is actually called a float, which we already talked about. The resulting type of a float division, hence the name. Do you ever get that annoying format where you do a calculation and then afterwards the result is a float, but you actually want to print so that it's an integer? Well, now we're going to learn how to cast the variable type to another variable type. So here we're going to cast 1.0 to an integer, and this is going to yield the result of 1. Okay, the type of the variable is now an integer, and the result should be 1. You also need to note that you have to include the second the variable in this command in brackets so that it doesn't confuse the variable as just a string. You can also cast an integer type to a float type, which basically adds the 0.0 at the end to make it a float, and it can now do operations with other float, such as multiplication, the float division, and basically all the arithmetic operators that I've showed you in that list. Now you can clear that line, and we're going to do another example. So now we're going to write a program that reads in 4 numbers, okay? And I'm going to show you how to do that with eval input. So you would write eval input as usual, and then put the prompt inside the input function. And then note that you use commas to separate each number that's entered. Okay, so here I've just typed in 3 numbers, but I'm going to fix that later. We're going to do 4. Feel free to pause the video at any time and just copy down the code, because sometimes it can be a bit hard to follow. Now, this program is going to calculate the average of the 4 numbers that has been inputted. And we're going to make sure that the result comes out as a float. And we do not use the integer division here because that's just going to convert it. What the integer division basically does is it gets the float result and it casts it to an integer and it truncates off the ending decimals. So basically you're rounding it down. And here, if we only use 1/, which is the float division operator, the result is going to be a float. As you can see here, I'm going to enter 4 numbers. And you have to make sure that the numbers are entered with a comma separating the numbers, because that's how eval function works. If you input it with space separating the individual integers, it will not, the program will report an error. Now you might look at that result and wonder, 1, 2, 3, 4's average isn't actually 7. What am I doing wrong there? Well, we go back to BEDMAS, which is the order of priority of the operations, and we think, okay, we're gonna in this program the code actually executes d divided by 4 first before the summation. So we need to still include things like brackets inside our equation. And here I've made some debugging code that basically prints out the 4 numbers. So this is how we would basically find out the error. You see that if I input something, the input comes out right. The 4 numbers are inputted correctly, and the program has received the input. So there must be something wrong with the equation. And then we can go on to think about, is this right? A plus B plus C plus D divided by 4. In this equation, the 4 operators and the summation needs to be included in parentheses. And then we should get a correct result here. So if we input 1, 2, 3, 4, the order doesn't matter here because you're going to sum up all the numbers anyway. And you should get 2.5. If you use some other numbers, it should also return the correct average. So now we're going to apply what we learned earlier in this video. We're going to use the int operator, which basically casts the result to an integer. Okay, so you see that you have to include the variable in brackets or else it's going to return an error. Now we can clear the screen, and I want you now to practice writing a simple piece of code using what we have learned so far. I want you to write a program that takes in 2 integer inputs, adds the 2 numbers, and print out the first operand plus the second operand is equal to the result, whatever that may be. Please pause the video now and make the code yourself, and then we're going to take it up together. So from what we learned in this video, we know that we should use the comma to separate the 2 variables that are being inputted in the assignment expression. And we can write the prompt inside the input again. And the eval will convert all of these integers into the integer types, which you can do arithmetic operations with. Note that you cannot, if you do not use the eval operators outside the input, it'll return a string, and you cannot do arithmetic operations with a string variable. So here we're going to format the output so that it is operand plus operand equals to result. So we type in our 2 operands and it should display that. Today we learned how to use arithmetic operators to do operations with number types, and we also learned how to assign multiple variable values to separate variables. Thank you for watching our video. Please subscribe or leave a like. You can also comment any questions that you have